Why was everyone staring at her like she didn't belong? Captain Carter felt the silence before she even crossed the threshold of the squadron's ready room. It clung to her flight suit like dust, heavy, invisible, impossible to brush away. A moment earlier, voices had filled the air: laughter, the low rumble of a projector, the sharp bark of orders carried from one pilot to another. But as her boots tapped against the polished floor, that sound thinned out until it was nothing but the echo of her own footsteps. She didn't flinch. She didn't pause. She let her movements remain precise, measured, every gesture speaking the language of discipline. Years of training had built this armor, posture like iron, eyes forward, silence worn as protection. She carried her tray with the same calm precision as if she had walked into a cafeteria at boot camp, not into a room full of Marines already whispering her name. They didn't know her, not really. Most of them had only seen her name in a roll call weeks before, a line of text buried among the other transfers. She was just another pilot to them, at least she should have been. But Carter had learned long ago that the reality of being another pilot didn't come easily for someone like her. Not when her records were thick with redactions. Not when her file raised more questions than answers. Some Marines muttered under their breath. Probably some publicity stunt. They want a poster pilot, someone to show off in recruitment ads. Another leaned back in his chair, smirking. Bet she's never seen real combat. They're just checking a box. The words carried enough weight to ripple through the group, their amusement loud enough to cut at her silence. Didn't look at them. She sat alone, steady, and ate in silence. The food was tasteless, but she chewed carefully, eyes fixed forward. Every part of her body language said the same thing: I will not give you the reaction you want. Colonel James noticed. From across the room, his gaze stayed fixed on her. 30 years of service had honed him into a man who missed nothing, and in that silence, that refusal to flinch, he recognized something unusual. He'd seen newcomers swagger in, desperate for validation. He'd seen others shrink under the weight of judgment, trying to make themselves small. But this woman, she simply arrived. No apology, no demand for recognition, just presence. And presence unsettled Marines more than bravado ever did. Wasn't an easy man to shake. He had earned his own call sign. The night he brought his jet back riddled with bullet holes, a reckless maneuver that saved his squadron but left him in body and reputation. He knew what it meant to carry a name given in blood, and that was why his jaw tightened as he watched her. Because Carter carried a name too, though she hadn't spoken it. That was what bothered him. Pilots didn't hide their call signs. They lived by them. Those names weren't chosen, they were earned in the worst moments of a career: humiliation, near death, bravery, disaster. A pilot's call sign was their truth. And yet, when had asked her once already in front of everyone, she had given him silence. Marines didn't hesitate, not about that. The colonel studied her like a puzzle. He remembered flipping through her file before her arrival, only to find pages blacked out, operations marked as classified, dates that didn't align with assignments. Bureaucracy might excuse some of it, but this wasn't red tape. This was deliberate. Someone wanted her past buried. And now she was sitting in his squadron. Later, when the briefing ended, decided he couldn't wait anymore. He had lived too long to let mysteries fester inside his command. He wanted answers. He needed them. The ready room was quiet again, filled with the dull hum of the projector winding down. Marines shuffled papers, voices low, cleared his throat, and the room stilled instantly. His voice cut across the silence with that deep authority that came only from decades in uniform. Captain Carter's head lifted. Her spine remained straight, hands folded neatly on the table. She didn't move like someone unprepared to be called out. She moved like someone who had expected it all along. His eyes narrowed. His words came sharp, deliberate. "What's your call sign?" The air shifted instantly. The younger Marines leaned back in their chairs, exchanging smirks. They waited for the slip, the awkward story, the embarrassing nickname that every pilot carried. Maybe she'd stammer something harmless, angel, doll, something that could feed their whispers. But didn't answer. For several long seconds, she stood in silence. His jaw clenched. He had seen silence used as defiance, seen it used as shame. But this was something else. Her silence wasn't fragile. It wasn't nervous. It was deliberate. A silence carried like armor. And he hated how much it made his gut twist. "Captain," he pressed, his voice lower now, the kind that cut through even the strongest pretense. "Your call's sign." His chest rose with a measured breath. Her lips parted for only an instant, then closed again. Her jaw tightened. Behind her stillness flickered something, pain, memory, loss. Every eye in the room fixed on her, and the silence stretched so long that even the smirks disappeared. The younger pilots shifted uncomfortably, confused by the weight that suddenly pressed into the room. The veterans, the ones who had been around long enough to recognize scars when they saw them, sat. Finally she spoke. Her voice was low, steady, cutting through the silence like steel drawn from a sheath. "Phantom 7. The words landed like a detonation. At first, confusion rippled through the younger Marines. Some chuckled. Sounds like a video game tag. A few muttered jokes under their breath, but their laughter faltered when they saw the faces of the veterans. Those men didn't laugh, they froze. A graying major, his hair cut close and his eyes sharp, whispered under his breath, "No, no, that can't be right." His voice trembled as if he had just seen a ghost. And stood utterly still, his chest tightening, his hands curling into fists. He hadn't heard that name in years, not since the desert skis of Afghanistan. Phantom Squadron. 7 aircraft deployed. 6 never came back. 1 returned. A mission buried under classified stamps, whispered only in late-night bars where veterans shared the kind of truths never meant for official reports. The lone survivor had never been named, never confirmed. To most, Phantom 7 was just that, a ghost story. But remembered the whispers. A pilot who refused to retreat. A jet that should have been shot out of the sky. A convoy of Marines saved by a miracle. And now, across from him, stood Captain Carter, speaking the name like it was nothing more than an introduction. The room felt heavier. Every Marine sat frozen in place. Swallowed hard, his voice rough when he finally found it. "Where did you get that name?" "Didn't blink. I didn't get it, sir. I earned it." Her words cracked the silence into something sharper, awe, disbelief, fear. The colonel's breath caught in his throat. His heart thudded once, hard, like an aftershock. Phantom 7 wasn't supposed to be real. Phantom 7 wasn't supposed to walk into his squadron. And yet here she was, standing steady in front of him, unflinching. A ghost returned. Why didn't he speak? Colonel James had spent decades in the Marines. He had shouted men into battle, buried brothers in arms, survived firefights that had left entire units shredded. He was not a man who froze. But when Carter's voice broke the silence with those 2 words, Phantom 7, something inside him locked up. He stood at the front of the briefing room, his arms crossed, his face carved in stone. But his eyes gave him away. Wide, unblinking, the pupils sharp with memory. Watched him carefully. She didn't smirk at the younger pilots who had laughed. She didn't soften at the veterans who stared at her like they were seeing an apparition. She simply stood there, her shoulders square, her expression unreadable, her call sign echoing in the air like the crack of distant artillery. The silence pressed in heavier than before. Finally found his voice. It wasn't steady, not like usual. It cracked slightly, betraying the weight in his chest. "Say it again." His chin lifted, Phantom 7. The words cut cleanly, no hesitation. The older pilots stiffened. Some shifted in their seats, uncomfortable, their gazes locked on her as if she might vanish if they looked away. One whispered, "It's impossible." Another simply shook his head, his lips pale, his jaw tight. His throat felt dry. His heart hammered not with fear but with recognition. Phantom 7 wasn't just a call sign, it was a name wrapped in loss, in failure, in ghosts. And she had just brought it into his squadron. He forced himself to turn, forced his boots to carry him toward the front of the room where his voice could regain authority. Dismissed. The word came out harsher than he intended, like an order barked under fire. The squadron stirred, hesitant, uncertain. Marines glanced at one another, whispers beginning to rise again, but no one dared press her further. Sat back down without looking at anyone, her movements clipped, calm, absolute. Didn't look at her again. He dismissed the room with the wave of a hand. But inside something rattled. That night he didn't sleep. His office was dark, the only light coming from the small lamp on his desk. Files were stacked around him, paperwork he should have been reading, signatures he should have been approving, but none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the echo of her voice. Phantom 7 leaned back in his chair, his hand dragging across his face. He closed his eyes, and instantly the memory surged. It was Afghanistan, 2009. A desert night thick with dust, the horizon glowing faintly orange with the fire of distant shells. He had given clearance to a squadron that night, 7 aircraft, 6 strike fighters and 1 reconnaissance jet. Phantom Squadron. The mission had been classified, the kind of operation even seasoned officers didn't speak about openly. On paper, it was simple. Escort a convoy through hostile territory, protect them, keep the skis clean. But paper never bled, paper never burned. The first distress call had crackled through the radios only 20 minutes after takeoff. Static, desperate voices. We're taking fire, heavy fire, convoys hit. Then silence. One by one, the jets fell dark. Eagle 2, Ghost 4, Viper 6. Each voice fading into nothing, each blip vanishing from the radar. Remembered gripping the console so tightly his knuckles went white, listening as chaos swallowed the airwaves. He had barked into the radio, ordering retreat, demanding the squadron break contact, but his voice was nothing against the storm. And then, "This is Phantom 7, I'm not leaving them." The voice had been sharp, steady, furious. A woman's voice. Had shouted until his throat burned, ordering her to disengage. But she didn't listen. She turned her jet back into the kill zone, flew low, too low, strafed enemy positions until the underbelly of her aircraft scorched from the flames below, covered the convoy as it crawled forward under the rain of gunfire. The reports afterward were vague. 6 aircraft destroyed, 1 unaccounted for. Unofficial whispers told a different story, that Phantom 7 had disobeyed, had risked everything, and had pulled Marines out of hell with nothing but fury and steel. That she had stayed long after the mission was lost, her jet riddled with fire, until reinforcements finally arrived. But no name was ever given. No survivor was ever confirmed. Phantom 7 had become a ghost story, a rumor told in bars by men who swore they'd heard her voice, swore they'd seen her jet limping through fire. But the Pentagon buried the rest, had believed she died that night. And yet, now she stood in his squadron, flesh, blood, a Marine with eyes that didn't flinch. The colonel exhaled slowly, his chest heavy. He opened his eyes again and stared down at the papers on his desk, though none of them mattered anymore. He had demanded her call sign. She had given it, and in doing so, she had opened a door he wasn't sure he wanted to walk through. Because if Phantom 7 was real, then everything he thought he knew about that night was a lie. A knock rattled his door. He straightened instantly. Enter. The door opened and Major stepped inside. A veteran pilot with graying hair had been one of the first to pale when spoke her call sign earlier. His jaw was tight now, his eyes unreadable. "Sir," he said quietly, "was it really her?" His gaze hardened. "You heard her." Shifted, running a hand across his face. "I flew with men who swore she didn't make it. They said her bird was trailing smoke, barely holding altitude. They said she went down before dawn. She didn't, said flatly. Hesitated, his voice dropping lower. What are we supposed to do with that? If the younger pilots find out who she really is, it'll shake the whole damn squadron. Leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the window where jets gleamed under floodlights. They don't need to know. Not yet. The major frowned. With respect, sir, they already know enough to ask questions. His jaw tightened. Then we keep it contained. Didn't argue further. He gave a sharp nod, saluted, and left the room, but knew the truth: nothing could contain what had already begun. He turned back to his desk, staring at the shadows creeping along the walls. Phantom 7 was here, alive, breathing. And ghosts didn't return without reason. Meanwhile, Carter sat on the edge of her bunk, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the blank wall across from her. Her hands rested on her knees, steady, but her chest churned with something she had buried for too long. For the first time in years, she had spoken the name aloud, Phantom 7. And already, the silence around it was growing louder. She knew the whispers would spread. By morning, every Marine on the base would be talking. Some would mock, others would doubt. But the ones who knew, the veterans, the officers who remembered the disaster of Kandahar, they wouldn't laugh. They would stare at her like had, as if she were something impossible. As if she were a ghost. Closed her eyes, breathing slowly, but memory clawed its way in no matter how much discipline she summoned. The night, the ambush, the screaming radios, the silence when one by one her brothers and sisters fell. And the choice she made. I'm not leaving them. The words had cost her everything. And now, sitting in a sterile barracks, decades of whispers pressing against her like a noose, Carter understood the truth she had always known but never spoken. Ghosts didn't stay buried forever. And tomorrow, Colonel would demand the rest. Why did she still refuse to tell him the whole truth? Colonel James had never tolerated half-answers. For 3 decades, Marines had stood in front of his desk and learned quickly that silence was not an option. But Captain Carter was different. She had spoken her call sign, Phantom 7, and in doing so, had brought ghosts roaring back from the desert. But she had not explained it, not fully, not in a way that satisfied the man who now had to command her. The morning after she revealed the name, summoned her again. This time, it wasn't in front of the squadron. It was in his office, private, walls bare except for framed commendations and old photographs of Marines he had led, Marines he had buried. She entered with sharp precision, saluted. Captain Carter reporting as ordered, sir. He didn't immediately return the salute. He let her stand there, the tension stretching between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Then, finally, he gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Sit. Obeyed. For a long moment just studied her. She met his stare without flinching, her posture flawless. But the silence between them was heavy, thick with the unsaid. You've been here less than 24 hours, began, his voice even, and already you've stirred up this squadron. I didn't intend to, sir, she replied, her tone clipped. That's the problem, shot back. A Marine doesn't need to intend it. Reputation follows you whether you want it to or not, and you, his finger tapped the desk between them, carry a reputation I can't trace. That makes me uneasy. His eyes didn't waver. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Leaned forward, his voice hardened. When I asked for your call sign, you hesitated. That's not how this works, you know it. Every pilot in that room knew it. Her jaw tightened. A flicker of something passed across her face, hesitation, not from fear but from weight. A story pressing against her lips, chained in silence. Caught it, he always caught it. You've been redacted half out of your own record, he pressed. Operations blacked out, commendations missing, temporary assignments that stretch on for months without detail. Do you know what that looks like to me? Said nothing. It looks like someone's hiding something, either for you or from you." The silence stretched. The faint rumble of jets outside bled through the walls, a reminder of the world that demanded precision and truth. But inside this office, the silence cut deeper than the roar of engines. His voice dropped low, sharp as a blade. "You're going to tell me your story, Captain, not because I'm curious, not because the Marines are whispering, but because I need to know who the hell I'm flying with. I don't care what the Pentagon buried. I don't care what's stamped classified. I care about the truth." Inhaled slowly. Her chest rose, then fell, measured, controlled. For a moment it seemed she would remain silent again, but then her lips parted. "Do you really want to know, sir?" Her voice was softer than he expected. His eyes narrowed. "That's not a question you ask a Marine colonel. That's a question you ask a chaplain." His gaze locked on his, unwavering. "It's not a name you forget once you hear it." Something twisted in his chest. For the first time in years, felt a flicker of unease. "Say it," he demanded. Her voice came low, steady, sharp enough to cut through him. "Phantom 7. Froze. The air between them felt like ice. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in over a decade. Not since the night he'd listened helplessly as a squadron was torn apart in Afghanistan. Not since the desert skis of Kandahar burned with tracer fire and static-filled radios. 7 jets deployed, 6 never came back, only 1 returned. The reports had called it a disaster. Command had buried it, scrubbed names from records, sealed the truth under layers of classification. But veterans had whispered about a ghost in the skis, a pilot who had refused to retreat, who had flown through impossible odds to pull Marines from a convoy seconds away from annihilation. No one ever confirmed the survivor. Some said she crashed before dawn. Others swore she vanished, buried by the same silence that erased the mission from history. Phantom 7. Now here she sat across from him, flesh, blood, steady as stone. His jaw clenched, his voice rough. "That's not an answer, that's a legend." His eyes softened, but her voice stayed calm. "And yet here I am, sir." The defiance in her tone didn't rattle him as much as the conviction beneath it. She wasn't dodging. She wasn't guilty. She wasn't even afraid. She was withholding because the truth itself carried danger. Leaned back, crossing his arms, studying her every flicker, every stillness. "Do you know how many Marines swore Phantom 7 wasn't real?" he said quietly. "That it was a story invented to give hope to men who'd lost brothers." His lips pressed together. She didn't answer. "You think I don't know what silence means?" Pressed. "I've seen Marines break down in interrogation rooms, in hospital beds, in chaplains' offices. Silence isn't about what you can't say, it's about what you won't say. And you," he leaned forward, his eyes sharp, "are holding something back." Her jaw tightened, a crack in her armor. Pounced. "I need to know what happened. Was that you? That night in Kandahar, the convoy ambush, the 7 jets?" His gaze held his, calm, controlled. "If it was, sir," she said softly, "it's classified." The answer hit harder than confirmation. Stomach churned. He remembered the after-action reports, vague, sanitized. Enemy resistance underestimated, heavy losses, operation terminated. But he remembered the whispers more. A lone pilot who had disobeyed orders, who dove back into the kill zone, strafing enemy trucks so close the underbelly of her jet burned. A miracle that kept a convoy alive long enough for reinforcements to arrive. And now, the woman sitting in front of him carried that ghost on her shoulders. The silence stretched. Let it. The hum of the air conditioner seemed deafening. Finally rose, her voice was steady. "Sir, if I may speak freely." Gestured. "The Corps didn't send me here to tell stories," she said. "They sent me here to serve. Whatever name you think I carry, whatever mission you think I was part of, it doesn't matter. What matters is this squadron. What matters is the mission ahead." Her words were sharp, disciplined, but underneath them heard exhaustion. the kind that came from years of silence pressing against her chest. For the first time, he didn't argue, he simply nodded. Dismissed. Saluted sharply, turned, and walked out without another word. When the door closed, exhaled slowly. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Alone now, he let the memories come. The desert night, the frantic radio chatter, the silence as jets went dark one by one, the desperate calls of Marines pinned down, and then, against all odds, a single voice refusing to yield. Phantom 7. He had thought it was a ghost story. But ghosts didn't walk into his office wearing captain's bars. Sat back in his chair, the weight pressing down on him like it hadn't in years. For the first time since Afghanistan, he felt doubt clawing at his discipline. Because if Phantom 7 was real, if she was sitting in his squadron, then everything he thought he knew about that night was about to unravel. And the silence around Captain Carter wasn't just heavy. It was dangerous. Why hadn't she died that night? Carter lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. The barracks were quiet, the low hum of air conditioning filling the silence, but inside her chest, memories roared louder than engines. For years, she had lived under orders not to speak, not to claim her story, not even to acknowledge her own survival. But when demanded her call sign, something inside her cracked. Phantom 7. She had spoken it aloud, and the weight of it now pressed against her ribs like the desert had pressed against her body the night she should have died. Her eyes closed, and memory swallowed her whole. The ambush had erupted fast. Her jet had rattled with gunfire, tracer rounds tearing past her canopy. Voices filled the radio, shouts, panic, static. One by one, her squadrons faded into silence. 6 birds down, 6 pilots gone. She had begged them to hold formation, but fear scattered them. The enemy had planned well, funneled them into a kill zone with no exit. And then came the choice. Retreat, save herself, or dive back into the fire. Her voice had cut through the chaos, steady but furious. I'm not leaving them. Orders had crackled in her ear, break off, return to base, save your jet, but knew what was at stake. The convoy pinned below wasn't just numbers on a map. They were Marines cut off, seconds away from being overrun. So she dove. Her hands had moved faster than thought, pushing her jet lower, closer, until the flames from the valley licked against her fuselage. Her weapons carved space for the convoy, shredding enemy trucks, forcing insurgents to scatter. She flew like a woman already dead, banking harder, cutting sharper, every pass gambling with fate. And then, an RPG hit. The explosion tore across her tail. Warning lights screamed across her console, smoke filled her cockpit, metal shrieked as it came apart. She had stayed long enough to buy them time, but not long enough to escape. Her jet broke, the controls died. She pulled the eject handle a second before the horizon swallowed her. The canopy exploded away, the chute snapped open, too late, too low. The desert slammed into her like a wall. Pain ripped through her body, ribs broken, arm fractured, shrapnel burning in her leg. She thought she would bleed out, alone, faceless under the Afghan sky. But death never came. She woke hours later on a dirt floor, her wounds wrapped in cloth. Not insurgents, not Marines, civilians, local villagers caught in the crossfire. They had pulled her from the wreckage, hid her when patrols swept the area, fed her scraps when food was scarce. She owed her life to strangers who asked nothing in return. For weeks she lay in the shadows, listening to the distant rattle of gunfire, fever burning her body. When she could finally stand, the war had already decided her fate. Her name was listed among the dead. Phantom Squadron, 6 confirmed, 1 presumed KIA. Carter erased. By the time she stumbled back to a U.S. outpost, her survival was no miracle. It was an inconvenience. She remembered the way the officer had looked at her, not with relief, but with calculation. Her survival didn't fit the story. The mission was a disaster. The brass didn't want a survivor who complicated the narrative. So they scrubbed her name, classified her debrief, buried her in silence. She was alive, but officially she did not exist. And for years she obeyed, reassigned quietly, passed along like a ghost in a system that had no place for her. Her orders were simple: serve but never speak. And she had. Until now. Her eyes opened again, pulling her back into the sterile barracks. The storm of memory still clawed at her chest. For years she had carried silence as survival. Now it felt like a cage. A knock came at her door, sharp, authoritative. "Captain Carter." She rose instantly, straightened her uniform, opened the door. Colonel stood there, his face unreadable but his eyes burning with questions. "Walk with me." They moved through the quiet hallways, past rows of bunks, past the faint hum of generators, out onto the tarmac, where floodlights washed the parked jets in pale silver. The night smelled of jet fuel and steel. Stop turned to her, his jaw set. "I want the truth," he said, his voice low but sharp. "All of it. What happened after that night? How the hell are you standing here?" His heart pounded. For years she had swallowed these words. For years silence had been her weapon, but under the weight of his demand the words spilled out. "I survived, barely. My jet went down miles from the fight. I ejected, landed broken. Locals pulled me from the wreckage. They kept me alive, hid me from patrols. When I finally made it back, command didn't see a survivor. They saw a problem. My survival didn't fit their story, so they erased it. Erased me. I became the ghost they wanted." His jaw tightened. He didn't interrupt, he didn't look away. "They told me to disappear," continued. "So I did. I kept my head down, took every assignment, never spoke of that night, but it never left me, not once." The wind rustled across the tarmac, carrying her words into the dark. "And now?" asked his voice quieter. His gaze didn't falter. "Now I'm done being silent." For a moment the colonel just stared at her. The floodlights carved hard lines across his face, but his eyes softened, if only slightly. "Then we'll face what comes next together," he said. Something inside almost believed him, almost. But she knew the truth better than anyone. When ghosts returned, the living rarely welcomed them. And being Phantom 7 meant her war was far from over. By morning the base felt different, not visibly. No alarms, no sudden orders, but unspoken tension hung in the air. Wherever walked, eyes followed her. Conversations cut off when she passed. The name had spread. Phantom 7. At first it was just a whisper in the briefing room. By sunrise it was rumor in the mess hall. By noon it was echoing through every corridor. Some laughed, brushing it off as a dramatic nickname. Others sneered, insisting she was just a pilot with attitude. But the veterans, they didn't laugh. They didn't sneer. They stared at her with something closer to fear. Because they knew the story. And if she really was Phantom 7, then they were living alongside a ghost. Ignored the whispers. She kept her stride even, her chin lifted. She had been a Marine long enough to know rumors could eat a unit whole if fed. But even she felt the shift, the weight pressing heavier with every glance. By midday, her flight schedule was cleared. The clerk at operations avoided her eyes as he handed her a slip marked with one word: "Stand by." Folded it neatly, tucked it into her pocket, and said nothing. She knew what it meant. Someone was watching. That afternoon's office phone rang 3 times. The first call came from Wing Command, polite but pointed: "Is it true?" The second came from the Pentagon, less polite: "We need confirmation on Captain Carter." The third was from a voice didn't recognize, cryptic: "Has the Phantom resurfaced?" Gave the same answer each time. "Captain Carter is a Marine pilot in good standing. That's all I can confirm." But he knew it wouldn't hold. Not for long. By early evening, a black SUV rolled through the gates, dust rising in its wake. Two men in plain suits stepped out. They didn't smile. They didn't waste words. They showed badges just long enough to silence questions and walked straight to his office. "Colonel," one said, his voice clipped, "we're here regarding Captain Carter." Stood behind his desk, his hands clasped behind his back. "She's one of my pilots." "Correction," the second said, setting a file on his desk. "She was presumed KIA in 2009, yet somehow she's alive and assigned under your command. Care to explain?" Kept his face neutral. Her records speak for themselves. The man opened the file, pages of redactions, photos blurred into shadows. A casualty list stamped Phantom Squadron, classified. "Colonel," the taller one said, leaning in, "this isn't routine. Captain Carter's survival was never supposed to see daylight. Someone buried that story for a reason, and now, thanks to you, it's surfacing." His jaw tightened. "I didn't bring her here. Command assigned her. I only learned the truth yesterday." The agent's eyes narrowed. "Then you understand why she needs to be contained." Contained. Like she was a hazard. Like she was a weapon that couldn't be trusted. Said nothing. The men closed the file, walked out, and left as abruptly as they had come. Their SUV kicked dust as it sped away. Stood alone, the words still hanging in the air. Contained. He clenched his fists, because he knew they'd be back. And next time, they wouldn't just want answers. They'd want control. Why did survival feel like betrayal? The Pentagon's hallways echoed with her footsteps, each tap of her boots reverberating off the marble floor. Captain Carter had walked into combat zones before, dirt airstrips in Kandahar, burning valleys where tracer fire painted the night. But nothing felt quite like this. These walls weren't by shrapnel or painted with dust. They were polished, sterile, humming with fluorescent light. And yet the danger here was sharper. It wasn't bullets that threatened her now, it was silence. Two men in plain suits had escorted her from the base, their conversation minimal, their eyes forward. They didn't cuff her. They didn't threaten her. They didn't need to. The weight of their presence carried all the power in the world. Now, as they guided her into a secure briefing room, felt her jaw tighten. Two officers waited inside. One was Lieutenant Colonel, sharp-eyed, sharp-voiced, the kind of leader who could break a room without raising her tone. The other was a man had only heard about in whispers, Director Crane. His reputation wasn't carved in the battlefield, but in shadows, a man who knew how to bury truths so deep even graves forgot. "Captain Carter," Crane began, his voice low, deliberate, "you are a problem." Stood at attention, she didn't flinch. "Sir." "Not for what you did in Kandahar," Crane continued, leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled. "You saved lives, too many perhaps. That's not the issue. The issue is that you survived." Leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Your survival contradicts the narrative that's been maintained for years. Phantom Squadron was lost in action. All 7. That's the story. That's what the public, Congress, and international partners believe. If that story changes now, then the truth comes out," interrupted, her voice steady. His eyes sharpened. "Captain, this isn't about truth, it's about stability." His jaw tightened. "You erased 6 names, men I flew with, brothers who died in the valley that night. You buried them under silence, and now you want me to stay buried with them." Crane's lips curved into something too thin to be called a smile. "You misunderstand, Captain. Silence isn't cowardice. It's survival, for the Corps, for the mission, for the country." "I understand silence," said. Her voice didn't rise, but her words struck harder than a shout. "I lived it, for years, but silence doesn't honor them, it erases them, and I won't be erased again." The room went still. Glanced at Crane. For the first time, her mask cracked, not into anger, but into something like reluctant respect. Crane leaned forward. "You're not listening, you don't decide how this ends. We do. You're a ghost, Phantom 7. That's all you were ever supposed to be. A whisper, a rumor, nothing more. Ghosts don't walk the halls of the Pentagon. Ghosts don't stand in squadrons, they vanish. His eyes locked on his. Then maybe I'm not a ghost anymore. The words hung in the air, heavier than any silence. Crane studied her. His face remained carved from stone, but something flickered in his eyes of frustration, maybe even unease. "You don't understand the gravity of this," he said finally. "If you stay visible, if your name resurfaces, there will be questions, investigations, scandals. Kandahar will be reopened and the truth won't be pretty. You'll be paraded, politicized, destroyed, and the Corps will bleed for it." His voice softened. "The Corps already bled. I was there when it happened. I buried them in fire. I carried their voices on the radio until the static took them. And if the cost of honoring them is that I bleed now, then I accept it." Silence again. Only this time it wasn't compliance, it was defiance. Leaned back, her eyes still on. Most Marines would crumble under this. Most would take the easy out. But you, she exhaled almost reluctantly. You carry the weight of the living and the dead. His gaze flicked toward a framed photograph on the wall. A black and white picture of Phantom Squadron. 7 faces. 6 names blacked out in ink. She stared at it for a long moment, her voice low when she finally spoke. "I carry them, and I won't let their names fade." Crane closed his eyes briefly, as if weighing the cost. Then he exhaled through his nose. "Very well, Captain Carter, you leave us no choice. Officially, you remain classified. Unofficially, your squadron will know who you are. You will continue under Colonel's command. But make no mistake, every movement you make will be scrutinized. One step off course and you vanish for good." Didn't flinch, understood. His eyes softened just slightly. "You've earned your place, but remember the world isn't as forgiving as Colonel." Gave the faintest of smiles. "Then I'll remind it why I survived." Back at the airbase, Colonel stood on the tarmac, the roar of engines rumbling across the night. He had waited hours, packing, his chest heavy with a mix of doubt and anger. When he finally saw her returning from the SUV, his breath caught. She walked toward him steady, her stride unwavering. "You made it," said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Barely," replied. "They wanted a ghost. I showed them a Marine." His lips pressed into a tight line. For the first time in years, he allowed his guard to slip just slightly. Relief flickered across his face. "I thought I knew courage," he said quietly. "But you changed what I thought I knew about it." Didn't answer. Her eyes shifted toward the squadron across the runway. Younger pilots watched her with curiosity now, their mockery replaced with uneasy fascination. Some veterans nodded slowly, silent acknowledgement of a legend they thought they'd never meet. Stepped closer. "The question now is what you do with it." Her voice came steady, quiet but certain. "I fly. I protect my Marines. I keep my word. Phantom 7 isn't a ghost anymore. She's alive." The colonel let out a slow breath. "Then let's make sure they never forget it." Turned toward her jet, floodlights glinting off its sleek frame. She ran a gloved hand across the fuselage, feeling the steel beneath her touch. The past had nearly buried her, but here now she wasn't buried. She wasn't erased. She was alive. She was Phantom 7. And as she climbed into her cockpit, the engines roaring to life, the night sky stretched wide and waiting. Why did silence spread faster than truth? The squadron was restless. Felt it the moment she stepped back onto the tarmac. The airbase hummed as it always did, engines rumbling, mechanics shouting over the whine of drills, radios buzzing with chatter. But beneath the routine, there was something different, something sharper. Eyes followed her now, not with curiosity but with calculation. Pilots who had mocked her days ago now stood a little when she passed. Some offered stiff nods, forced respect. Others looked away, unease etched into their features. Phantom 7. The name had become more than a call sign. It was a story threading through the barracks, the hangars, the mess hall. Some whispered it with awe, others with suspicion, but none ignored it. walked as if she didn't notice. Chin lifted, stride steady. Inside, though, the weight pressed harder. She had lived years as a ghost, invisible. Now being seen felt heavier than silence. That night during the squadron briefing, Colonel called the room to order. The pilots shuffled into place, their eyes flicking toward as she sat near the back, hands folded neatly in her lap. His voice carried authority as always, but even he felt the shift in the air. He glanced once toward before speaking. Listen up, we've got live exercises scheduled tomorrow. High-altitude maneuvers, weapons training, the works. I expect precision. No excuses. He paused, his gaze swept the room, and I expect cohesion. The word landed like a weight. The room stayed silent but caught the flickers in their eyes. Cohesion was fragile now, a thread stretched thin. After the briefing, as the pilots dispersed, a voice cut through the crowd. Captain Carter turned. It was Lieutenant Daniels, younger, sharp-jawed, carrying himself with the confidence of a man who had never been forced to question his own survival. "Sir," she replied, her voice even. Daniels tilted his head, studying her. "Is it true, Kandahar, Phantom Squadron?" The room went quieter around them. Pilots slowed their steps, listening without looking. "Didn't blink, what do you think?" Daniels smirked faintly. "I think legends are just stories, and stories don't keep you alive up there." He jabbed a thumb toward the hangar doors where jets loomed like shadows. "Flying does." Met his gaze, calm as stone. "Then I'll see you in the air tomorrow." The silence that followed wasn't victory or defeat. It was a challenge hung between them, waiting to be answered. That night in the mess hall sat alone at the edge of a long table. Her tray sat untouched, steam fatting from the food. Conversations rose and fell around her, but she didn't join them. She wasn't unwelcome. She wasn't invited. Across the room she caught his eye. The colonel didn't approach, didn't intrude, but he nodded once. A quiet signal, "I see you." Lowered her gaze. Her fork scraped lightly against the tray, but her mind wasn't on the food. It was in the desert again, in the valley, in the wreckage. She remembered the voices that had gone silent one by one, the names that never made it past the redactions. 6 men gone, 1 survivor erased. She had carried them in silence for years. Now, their ghosts followed her into every room. The next morning, the squadron launched into the sky. Engines thundered, rattling the airfield as steel birds climbed into the clouds. His hands were steady on the controls, her eyes scanning the horizon. The altitude thinned the air, but not her focus. She lived in this space. The cockpit was her sanctuary, metal, glass, sky. The exercise began simple. Maneuvers, turns, banking through clouds. Then weapons drills, firing at virtual targets blinking across their HUDs. Precision, timing, coordination. Flew flawlessly, but she felt the tension in formation. Daniel stayed too close to her flank, shadowing her moves like a test. Twice he clipped her airspace, forcing her to bank harder than necessary. "Maintain distance," his voice barked through the radio. "Yes, sir," Daniels replied smoothly, but caught the edge in his tone, the deliberate push. On the third run, Daniels broke formation entirely, diving lower than ordered. Reacted instinctively, cutting across his path to stabilize the gap in the line. Her jet shuddered under the strain, alarms blaring briefly before settling. "Daniels," his voice roared, "get your ass back in position." But it was his voice that cut sharper, calm, cold. "Don't test me again, Lieutenant." The silence on the radio crackled louder than static. For a moment, no one spoke, then ordered them back to base. Back on the ground, Daniels stormed across the tarmac, his helmet still in his hand. "You trying to make me look like an idiot out there?" he snapped. Unbuckled from her seat, sliding down the ladder with quiet precision. Her boots hit the ground softly. She looked at him evenly. "You did that yourself," she said. Daniel stepped closer, anger flashing across his face. You think because of some ghost story you're untouchable, that we're all supposed to just salute and whisper your name like you're some kind of legend. Didn't raise her voice. She didn't step back. I think I buried 6 pilots who deserved more than whispers. The words cut deeper than any shout. Daniels froze, his jaw tightening. He wanted to argue, but the weight of her voice left him nothing to hold on to. Appeared before it escalated further. His presence silenced the confrontation instantly. "That's enough," the colonel said. His tone carried no room for defiance. "Daniels, you'll speak with me in my office." Carter dismissed, saluted sharply, and walked away. Behind her, the tension still crackled, but she didn't look back. That night she stood alone by the runway. The base was quiet, stars scattered across the sky. She watched a jet taxi in the distance, its lights blinking against the dark. She remembered the night sky over Kandahar. The silence after the last call sign faded, the cold weight of being the only voice left. For years she had carried it as a secret. Now she carried it in the open, and it was heavier than ever. Approached quietly, his boots crunching against the gravel. He stopped beside her, hands folded behind his back. "You handled Daniels well today," he said. Didn't look at him. "I don't want to fight my own squadron." His gaze stayed on the horizon. Conflict doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it means standing until the other man runs out of words. Let out a slow breath. "They'll never trust me, sir, not all of them." "Maybe not," admitted. "But they don't need to trust a story. They need to trust a Marine. And you've proven yourself every time you've stepped in that jet." Finally turned to him. "And if the Corps decides I'm more trouble than I'm worth?" Met her eyes. His voice was steady, but his jaw tightened. "Then they'll have to come through me first." The words hit harder than any order. For the first time, felt something crack inside the armor she had worn for years. Not weakness, not doubt, something closer to belonging. It scared her more than silence ever had. Because ghosts weren't supposed to belong. And she still wasn't sure the living would ever let her. Why did the call feel heavier this time? The alarm ripped through the base at 200 hours. Harsh, unforgiving. Pilots scrambled from bunks, pulling on flight suits with shaking hands, boots thudding across the concrete floor. The klaxons didn't cry for drills. They cried for war. Was already awake when the siren began. Sleep had been shallow, haunted by memories of smoke and fire, of 6 voices fatting one by one. She rose calmly, zipped her suit, and moved with the others toward the hangar. Colonel was waiting by the mission board. His jaw was tight, his voice clipped. "Convoy hit northeast of Kandahar. Insurgents armed with heavy weapons. They've pinned down 3 Humvees in a valley. Air support is required immediately. That's us." The words cut deeper than for anyone else in the room. Kandahar, the valley, the same soil that had burned her life to ash years ago. Her fingers flexed into fists at her sides, unseen. His gaze flicked toward her for the briefest second before continuing. "We launch in 5. Daniels, your wingman. Carter, you've got point." A ripple passed through the room. Daniels stiffened, his eyes flashing, but he didn't speak, not with his tone carrying that much weight. Gave a sharp nod, "Copy." 5 minutes later, engines roared across the runway. Steel birds clawed into the night sky, afterburners blazing against the black. The squadron climbed high, banking east, their formation cutting through the stars. His cockpit hummed around her, HUD glowing faint green, hands steady on the controls. The voice of the ground controller crackled in her headset. "Phantom flight, be advised. Hostiles entrenched along the convoy position marked. Time on target 4 minutes." "Copy," replied. "Stay sharp." His chest tightened. This wasn't just another mission. It was a mirror of the night that had made her a ghost. And this time she wasn't flying alone. She forced her breath steady, in through her nose, out through her mouth. The past would not own her, not tonight. "Phantom 7, your point," ordered. "Lead us in." Her call sign echoed through the radio, solid, real, undeniable. For years it had been buried. Now it was alive again, carried on the wind above Kandahar. Banked low, her jet slicing through the clouds. Below, the valley opened, a convoy trapped in fire. Tracer rounds stitched across the dirt. Insurgents lined the ridges, weapons hammering down on pinned Marines. Her HUD lit with targets, too many. "Engage," she said, her voice steady. Daniels scoffed through the calm. "Copy, Phantom 7, try not to get us killed." Ignored him. She dropped altitude, throttling hard, the valley rising fast. Her jet roared overhead, guns spitting fire, carving lines across enemy positions. Explosions ripped through as hostile trucks erupted in flame. The convoy below cheered through static-filled comms. Phantom 7, you're clearing them out." Banked hard, pulling that slammed her chest into the seat. Her jet screamed in protest, but she didn't relent. She dove again, missiles locking, firing clean. Another blast tore through the valley, scattering insurgents. "Carter, brake right," barked. She yanked the stick, narrowly missing a burst of RPG fire that streaked past her canopy. The explosion rattled her jet, alarms flaring. "Close," Daniels muttered. "Too close." "Stay focused," snapped. The squadron circled, each pass carving the valley into submission. Daniels finally fell into rhythm, his fire coordinated with hers, their jets moving like twin blades cutting the dark. "Convoy reports minimal casualties," ground control called. "Insurgents retreating. You've bought them their window." His breath caught. The words felt like an echo from years ago, only this time she wasn't alone. "Mission accomplished," said, "Pull back, Phantom Flight." But just as the squadron began to climb, a streak of fire ripped across the night sky. A surface-to-air missile. It locked onto Daniels' jet. "Missile, missile, missile." Daniels' voice cracked with panic. His jet banked hard, countermeasures flaring, but the missile stayed true. "Didn't think," she moved. Her jet dove between Daniels and the streak of fire, flares dropping, countermeasures screaming. The missile locked on her instead. Impact. The explosion slammed against her fuselage, rattling the cockpit, alarms blaring in every direction. Fire streaked across her wing, smoke trailing. Her controls shuddered under her grip. "Carter, report," barked. Gritted her teeth, forcing the jet higher, fighting the spin. "I'm still flying." Her HUD flickered, half her systems red, but the engines held, barely. "You're hit bad," said, voice tight. "Not down yet." Silence filled the radio for a moment. Then Daniel's voice broke through, raw. You took the hit for me." Forced the jet to level, her voice calm despite the fire licking at her wing. "Stay in formation, Lieutenant. Finish the job." No one spoke after that. The squadron regrouped, their formation holding tight. Together, they carved the last of the valley's resistance into silence. When the final hostile position went dark, the convoy moved. Marines rolled forward alive, because Phantom 7 had led them through fire. The return flight was quiet. Jet limped in the air, smoke trailing, alarms still blinking. Every mile home was a battle. His voice finally cut the silence. "Phantom 7, you still with us?" His lips pressed into a thin line. Her voice came steady. "Still with you." When they touched down, emergency crews swarmed her jet, foam spraying across the scorched wing. Climbed down, boots hitting the tarmac with a heavy thud. Daniels was waiting, his helmet still under his arm, his eyes wide. For once, his smirk was gone. "You should let it hit me," he said, voice rough. Met his gaze. "That's not how this works." His jaw tightened. "I don't get it, you don't even like me." "I don't have to," she replied. "You're still my Marine." For the first time, Daniels had no answer. He just stood there, staring at her like he was seeing something he couldn't name. Approached, his hand firm on her shoulder. "You did more than fly tonight, Carter. You gave them something to believe in." glanced at the squadron gathering nearby, their eyes on her. Not with suspicion, not with mockery, with respect. For years she had been a ghost, but tonight, on the soil that once erased her, Phantom 7 had returned. Alive. Real. Unforgettable. Why did survival feel harder than death? The mission had ended, but the silence after was heavier than any explosion. The squadron walked off the tarmac as one, helmets in hand, sweat streaking their faces. No jokes, no swagger, just the weight of what they had seen. Walked among them steady, her uniform singed with smoke from her crippled jet. She had bled for them again, not because she had to, but because she couldn't let them die, not when she had already lived through 6 names fatting into nothing. The hangar lights buzzed overhead as they gathered, dispersing slowly into groups. Conversations stayed hushed, like whispers in a chapel. Daniels lingered at the edge of the room, his usual smirk gone. When past, he straightened, his voice rough but sincere. "You saved me," he said. Stopped, met his eyes. For once they weren't hard or arrogant, just raw. "I saved the squadron," she said quietly. "You're part of it." Daniels swallowed hard, nodded once, then stepped back. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't surrender, but it was respect, the kind that couldn't be demanded, only earned. Approached next, his presence cutting through the room. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You didn't just fly tonight," he said. His voice was low, meant for her alone. "You rewrote yourself, you're no ghost anymore." His jaw tightened. "I never wanted to be one." Gave a faint nod, then stopped living like one. His words hit harder than shrapnel. Stopped living like one. For years, silence had been her armor. Now, it felt like a prison she had built herself. 2 days later, Washington called again. The same SUV rolled through the base gates, the same men in suits stepping out. They didn't waste time. They wanted. She walked into his office where they waited, file folders stacked, their eyes sharp. "Captain Carter," one began, "your actions in Kandahar have resurfaced at the highest levels. The convoy you saved last week has filed reports. Your name is spreading. And once again, the legend of Phantom 7 is alive." The second leaned forward, voice colder. "That's a problem." His voice cut through before could answer. "It's not a problem, it's proof. Proof that she's exactly who she says she is. Proof that she belongs." The agent's jaw tightened. "Colonel, legends inspire, but they also destabilize. Stories like hers don't stay clean. Politicians will weaponize it. Families of the dead will demand answers. Command will ask why it was hidden for so long. And when that storm hits—" Interrupted, her voice calm. "When that storm hits, let it. I've been silent long enough. If the truth burns, then let it burn me, not them." The room went still. The suit studied her, weighing whether to fight or relent. Finally, one closed the file with a sharp snap. "You'll regret this," he said. Didn't flinch. "I've regretted silence more." The men left. Dusk clung to the air long after the SUV rolled away. Looked at her, his expression hard but proud. "You just painted a target on your back." Exhaled, it was already there. Weeks passed. The squadron trained harder, flew. Something had shifted. Where there was once doubt, there was unity. Daniels flew steady on her wing now, his arrogance tempered, his silence heavier. The younger pilots watched her not as a myth, but as their lead. She had bled for them, they had seen it, and it changed everything. But inside still carried the ghosts. Some nights she dreamed of the desert, of fire, of static, of 6 voices dying out one by one. She woke with their names on her lips, names the Corps had erased, names the world would never know. It haunted her, but it also gave her purpose. She couldn't bring them back. She couldn't rewrite their end, but she could make sure their silence wasn't wasted. She flew for them now, every mission, every pass through the sky, every whisper of her call sign. Phantom 7. Not just a ghost, not just a survivor. A promise. on a cool morning called her into his office. No papers, no formal orders, just 2 mugs of coffee, steam curling in the air. He handed her one. "You know, Carter, when you said that name, Phantom 7, I froze. I thought I was staring at a ghost." Took the mug, held it in both hands. "You weren't wrong." He studied her for a moment. "You're more than that now." Her gaze drifted toward the window, where jets gleamed under the sun. "I'm not sure what I am." His voice softened. "You're proof that silence doesn't kill the truth, it just delays it." Let the words settle. For years she had lived erased. For years she thought her survival was a mistake, a story that didn't belong to her. But now she saw it clearer. Survival wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning of a harder one. She lifted the mug, took a sip, and for the first time in years felt something close to peace. Not because the ghosts were gone, but because they had finally been heard. That evening she stood at the edge of the runway, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The sky burned orange and gold, fading into blue. She thought of the 6 who hadn't come home. She thought of the villagers who had pulled her from the wreckage. She thought of every silence that had shaped her life. Her voice was low but steady, carried only to the wind. "I'm still here." No answer came, but she didn't need one. Because she knew. The ghosts weren't silent anymore. They flew with her. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.